from the Mutual Broadcasting System. This is STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk. Now, retired Marine Intelligence Officer and globally recognized risk expert Hal Kempfer.
Welcome to STRAT. Welcome to a little bit of a strategic risk assessment talk. A little bit different today. You're going to hear a lot less of me. I know people are pretty thrilled about that. Less of me is always better. And of course, for those listening, they're going great. But for those on YouTube, you're having to look at my face. This morning, you get to look at a face that you might actually want to look at, which is Andrew Craft. He is the lead anchor, top anchor, whatever you want to say, for Fox Live Now. And I'm sure many of you have seen me and Andrew together on Fox Live Now talking about various different things, important issues of the day, like is Taylor and Kelsey, are they going to stay together, and things like that. And then there's also that thing in Ukraine and the Middle East. I don't want to get into all the details, but we talk about a lot of different things. Andrew, thanks for joining today. Thanks.
Of course, Hal. I was honored to be asked.
Well, I was particularly thrilled that you decided to be here. By the way, I just want to point out that normally you're asking me questions, all right?
That is true.
And you're from Michigan, which normally being from Michigan gives you an upper hand. I may have the upper hand this morning, though, so I just want to point that out. So anyway, with all that said, Andrew, before we get too much into this, before we start traveling around the world and asking things about the news, what is Fox Live Now?
Okay, well, and Hal, you're on every day, and just to correct the record, live now from Fox.
I know.
It's official, yes, the official title. It's a lot of words, but gotta be accurate here. Live now from Fox.
Syllables, okay? I have a tough time.
A lot of syllables, yes.
Yeah.
So Live Now from Fox was started kind of during the first Trump term. It's had a lot of different iterations. And then during the pandemic, it was basically just airing press conferences about the pandemic from every state and locality. And then, the big bosses at Fox were looking to expand the streaming footprint within the Fox TV stations. And you might remember it used to be called News Now from Fox rather than Live Now. And then it made the name change, and it's just grown ever since. I've been there for now 4.5 years, and we've seen incredible growth. We've seen really positive feedback from viewers who like the format. And I think viewers who are familiar with our conversations, they like the longer form segments where you can really get into stories. It's so different from cable, mostly because there's so much time to fill. And, it's not as flashy because, and this might be news to some of your listeners, the anchor has to do everything. There's no control room. And you know that. And so
I've seen that bar. You are not only the Wizard of Oz, but you're behind the curtain all at the same time. It's amazing how much you have to do.
Yeah. And that's always like a work in progress. There's like this huge board in front of you, and you're just clicking buttons and controlling the audio, controlling what's on screen, and also trying to present information and not sound, flustered or frantic. So it's an acquired skill, something I've thankfully gotten down, but it took some time. And it's just allowed me to explore so many things I'm interested in. Thankfully, what I'm interested in, I think a lot of viewers are interested in too. And I really, really enjoy it because I came from, in the field, the cable background. So
yeah, kind of explain your lineage, if you will. How did you, you can explain, you can brag about Ann Arbor and talk about how you kind of ended up in that anchor chair.
Well, this kind of sounds like cliche, but I've always wanted to be a journalist. Like ever since I can remember, my idols were like the nightly news anchors and the Today Show. And so I always had that in mind. That was my like main goal and main aim. And I just had to find a way to get there somehow. And so I have found a way to get there. I mean, it's taken like a decade, but the ladder is long to climb in the news. So Yeah, I graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in political science and a minor in Spanish, knowing that I still wanted to be a journalist. It's just the University of Michigan didn't really have a journalism program, and I wanted just your standard like liberal arts degree. And I really made the most of it, taking a variety of classes and things like that. But still with that in mind, now it might be a little more difficult just to have a standard liberal arts degree and get a job after college, especially get a job in journalism. This was 2014. And I wanted to go like into a big network and kind of rise from there. And so Fox was just like the first, I think the only that called me back and gave me an interview.
Well, that makes a big difference in starting a career, is having a callback and getting hired. I found that to be a big deal. Yeah. Not getting called back, very difficult to go down that trajectory. Yes.
So I had applied to be a production assistant, which is like, the lowest on the low. And I had just graduated from college and it was like $12 an hour, but your foot's in the door and you're in the building. And that's what I did. I got accepted. And from there, just kind of developing, how to work in a newsroom and like my news judgment. And so it was very formative. It wasn't glamorous by any means. And it wasn't.
Now, which city is this?
This was in New York City.
New York City. Okay.
Yeah. So I moved there in the fall after graduation. It's fun to live in New York in your 20s. I mean, that's very fun. And we're, all the production assistants, the PAs, we call them, we were in it together, right? We were all the same age, kind of making the same amount of money, which was very low. Yeah.
By the way, that's what differentiates you from Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders did not want to live in New York in his 20s, decided to go to Vermont, and then that's a judgment call. Okay, keep going.
Well, yes, we'll get to Bernie Sanders in a minute. So after that was like a year and a half, and then Fox had this kind of young reporters program called the Multimedia Reporter Program that I was accepted into. And I was one of 5 young reporters who was basically about to be trained into everything you need to know about, shooting your own stories and editing them and writing them and presenting them on camera. And so that was in Las Vegas. So I went from New York to Las Vegas for 2 years.
A move like that's quite a gamble. Anyway, go ahead.
It is. Yeah. I had never been to Las Vegas before that. And that was a really interesting experience because, I hadn't moved that far and I didn't know anyone, but the stories were really great there. Mm-hmm. And I really liked the Southwest. But once that was over, and thankfully I, learned some things on that job, because it was very isolating. You're very alone. And you're working kind of from home and you're trying to find stories, and you get to travel a little bit in like your region. So like, for example, when I was there, the Las Vegas shooting happened, which was probably the biggest story that I was on. There were a lot of entertainment stories too, a lot of like red carpet junkets.
That would be the Raw 91 concert shooting. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So then once I got back, or once my contract ended in Las Vegas, Fox came to me and we're just kind of picking my brain about what I wanted to do next, and really kind of wanted to stay in the digital route. So I did a kind of a quick stint writing for Fox News Digital, and then they came to me after. This was kind of at the precipice of like 2018, 2019, when the presidential campaign was getting going. And I was accepted. It wasn't necessarily like a formal program, but I was one of the reporters who embeds with the candidates. And if you remember in 2020, there was like 23 Democratic candidates. Like everyone and their brother was running.
Huge field. Yeah.
Huge field. Yeah. And then eventually it winnowed down, and I was permanently assigned to the Bernie Sanders campaign. And I remember he dropped out of the campaign in like early April of 2020.
And the issue of living in New York in the 20s never came up in your conversations, I guess.
No.
That would make him very uncomfortable. Okay.
I know.
Okay.
But that was a really interesting campaign to cover. I made some lifelong friends in the press corps covering that campaign. And campaigns are just really fun. I mean, I got to travel to like almost every state, and you get to talk to voters, and you get to talk to just, everyday Americans about what they're feeling. And, 2020 was such a weird presidential election.
Well, because, pandemic.
And the pandemic kind of cut the campaign off. Basically, you couldn't really campaign at all. So, and then kind of once that experience for me was over, kind of Fox came to me and they were like, well, we're putting some resources into this thing called Live Now, and why don't you try your hand at it? And I was like, okay. I kind of felt it in my gut that I was like, this is really interesting, and this is going to be maybe the future. And that was kind of the start of how I've gotten here today. So,
wow, it's interesting.
That was a long timeline.
It's a fascinating timeline too, and it's so different. I mean, if you look at the timeline of how other reporters have moved into the anchor chair, the whole digital thing has changed news. It really, and this whole streaming concept. And I look at that because, I've worked, whatever talking head or whatever you want to say, expert for a couple of decades now. And most of those that I knew way back when came up the traditional route. They did kind of what you did, which was they worked in a station and they did some other things. They became a reporter. And then somebody saw a piece, and back then, tells you how far back it goes, they sent a tape. It was an actual tape that they would send out, and they get picked up, and eventually they end up in the anchor chair. And that was a traditional route. Not all the unusual things, and certainly not a big pandemic, which makes it very challenging. And I think you were planning on offering to live in Biden's basement in order to cover him, but they were very uncomfortable with that, and so you didn't allow to do that. And I think that was a good move on their end. That would have been kind of strange.
Probably.
But, yeah, probably. It's interesting. You and I connected via Fox.
Yeah.
Actually, Greg Lee out of KTVU, Fox 2. Actually put us together. He and I go back a long way because I was with ABC 7. I was actually on contract with them for a number of years with Disney, and that was no Mickey Mouse contract, but it was with Disney. Okay? And so he and I had done a lot of stuff together, and he saw the challenge of 24/7 live streaming news, and immediately assessed that you needed to bring on a lot of stuff. All right. Yeah. And I'm sure he was probably sitting there. It was like, they need to bring in experts, but I don't know that many experts, but I do know Hal. And so he said, I'll introduce Hal, because they got to fill up so much time that eventually they'll run out of experts and say, let's call Hal. And that makes sense. It's kind of like, got to call Sal, but similar, you get the idea. Anyway. Right. And so that's how I ended up with you and I talking. And the timing was rather interesting, because we started talking, and then a little thing happened in Ukraine.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the whole kind of premise and philosophy of Live Now is, we just show it to you and you can make up your own mind. We're not, and we don't want to be heated and partisan and opinionated, because people can get that, and they know where to get that already. We just want to be kind of sedate and calm and analytical about what's happening in the world. And we all have our opinions and biases and things like that. And you just check them at the door. And now I think it's interesting. I take the approach that, I just want to give you information. I just want to present to you what has happened. But I think talking to folks like yourself in a whole gambit of subject areas, I think asking provocative questions allows you to still flex that muscle while remaining objective. I think a provocative question is good because, it puts the onus on you to answer, not me. And I'm just asking the question. So that's why I appreciate it. And I think the viewers have really responded to that format. They don't like the hair on fire type of, partisan punditry that, happens all the time. And people know where to get that already. They just want it, just the facts, man. Here you go. And that's why we play live events from start to finish. We don't pick them apart. And we don't choose which part to show. It's here, it might be 25 minutes long, but we got the time to show it. So that's kind of the mission statement, so to speak.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about Live Now. Number one is we're not as compressed for time.
Yeah.
For example, I did a what we call a hit, as you know, an interview this morning on another network. I won't say which one, but you are compressed for time. It's network news, and you're going to get maybe 3-4 minutes, 5 at the outside, and that's it. And you and I will go on, and we'll typically talk for 10-15 minutes.
Yeah.
I think when the not when the balloon went up, but when the balloon went down, when the Chinese balloon went down, I think we were on for how long? We were talking,
I think like 3 hours, maybe
2.5, 3 hours, something like that. It was long
if you just run through the stories that, you and I have just like witnessed so much of this in the last 3-4 years with Russia, Ukraine, with the Chinese spy balloon, Israel and Hamas, and everything in between. I'm sure I'm leaving things out, but
there's a lot of things, but we've covered. Literally, I can remember some of our interviews, and it's like maybe this last week, I don't know, but some of our interviews where it's like we literally just take a trip around the world.
Yeah.
We'll start with what's going on in Ukraine. We'll talk about stuff in Europe, Middle East, maybe touch on Africa. Then we go over to Asia, South America, and we'll end up, I think one time we did a full circuit, and we ended up talking about submarine threats in the North Atlantic. I was like, that's pretty much circled the globe. Yeah.
Yes.
And that was a lot of stuff. So.
Yeah, I think, and the viewers know you. You're a regular cast member, so to speak, in the show. So I think, and I like variety, and I like bringing on newer guests. I love talking to reporters who cover a particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
I still consider myself, of course, a reporter, and making calls and stuff like that, getting information. But if we can bring on the person who's in whatever every single day, like that's what I love. And you're just so knowledgeable about everything, so that redounds to our benefit. You're just like a jack of all trades, because it's not only the international stuff too, Hal. Because we've done terror threats, we've done mass shootings, we've done we've done emergency management stuff and law enforcement response. So international side, you've been so instrumental with those types of stories too. So it's like I like finding new guests, and variety is important, but I think consistency is important too. Kind of building on the previous day and the previous day and the previous day, and having kind of like a conversation that's on a spectrum. Now I don't know if viewers particularly see it that way. They might be turning it on in the moment, and we might be talking about something we talked about 3 days ago, and they might be lost, but that's kind of how I see our trajectory of our segments, right? It's a straight line, but you're right. People might tune in and at any given moment, and they might be lost. But I try to keep it as generic as possible.
What's interesting is Live Now will cover full press conferences, which others won't do that. And for example, I was on this morning, and they were holding the press conference from the European leaders meeting in London, and Keir Starmer came on about the same time that my hit time was scheduled for. And I explained to the network, I said, well, it's not the first time that Keir Starmer or Macron or one of the other European leaders knew I was going to be on the air, and they're trying to, draft off my ratings because they know they'll get a big audience and stuff. It's annoying, but it happens, and I can't blame them, because who wants to hear Starmer just talk on his own? They want to. So anyway, but it is interesting that even in that, they were covering it, but they don't cover the whole thing.
Yeah.
Whereas Live Now will actually cover the whole thing. And they do that, and they'll cover some stuff much more intensively. Sometimes you'd say maybe it's too much coverage because, it's like we're waiting for someone to come up to the podium, and they are setting out a glass of water. And by the way, you do a fantastic job keeping it interesting while there is nothing going on at the podium. I got to tell you, you've developed that to a fine art.
Yes, that's the skill, and the challenge of it is, how do you make it compelling when nothing's happening right now? But you build an audience that way, right? You'd be surprised that just a static shot of like a podium, the audience builds and builds waiting for that. So if you can just, invite them in and keep it going, it's good for engagement that way. But
it's challenging.
It's challenging. Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, it's very challenging. But the thing is, and I think this too, back to how we're in control of everything up there. if we see it, not being compelling, or if we just need to take a breather, we can just go to the commercial break ourselves with a click of a button.
Yep.
If you're in like a studio with a big control room behind you, you can't do that. So I think that gives us a lot of flexibility to kind of reset, catch our breath, or not. Like if something's really compelling, like I can just forget the commercial break totally. So that gives us a lot of wiggle room.
What's interesting is, as you say that, and that is some of the digital age, and it is the power of, I know it's like a click of a button and people think, well, button's not that. Well, what you're doing is with the whole control panel.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because, I mean, when I started doing stuff, back in the early O's with TV, when you're out there with the anchor on the set, there's a whole control room, like NASA's control room.
Oh, yeah.
They can't control anything out there.
Yeah.
And this whole control room controls everything. And it's fascinating because you can do that and it looks just as good.
Right.
In fact, better than what we used to do back then. And I just find that absolutely fascinating. It's kind of the cutting edge of the news business as I see it. The fact that you have all that control to cut to various things and things like that. Although it does make it challenging because you'll pick up my feed, at the same time you're working on a story, and talk about multitasking. You've got to get more than a few things going on. I would be remiss if I didn't get your thoughts. Now, you talk to a lot of experts, folks, government officials, folks that used to be in government, folks, military, business, first responders, academics. You talk to a lot of top minds, and then occasionally you can't get them, so you call me. And but I want to get your sense. Where do you think Ukraine, based on all the stuff you're getting, where do you think the situation with Ukraine is going right now? With all the stuff that happened in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
What's happening in Europe and London right now, but also what's happening over there. What is your sense? Where do you see this story unfolding as we go forward?
Yeah. Before I get into that, you're right, though. The find, I love the search for the expert, for the reporter, for the guests. Booking on TV is a fine art, and I do like the hunt, so to speak. But to Ukraine, I just feel like the conventional wisdom is forming that, that Zelensky kind of stepped in it. And whether or not you disagree with that, it just seems like the onus by so many members of the Trump administration is being put on Zelensky, and none is being put on Putin. I mean, we've talked about this so many times. I don't know what Putin has had to do in the last, 2 weeks. You had the talks in Riyadh and then the meetings with the European leaders at the White House. And it just seems like Putin's watching all of this unfold, and he hasn't even been party to it. But he started the war, and he was the main aggressor. And so, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's kind of the inherent transactional nature that is President Trump, where he just wants to see some type of deal. Forget some of the values-based diplomacy that, we, or at least at the Biden administration and other previous administrations, kind of go into talks with. It's not just kind of a one-to-one thing. It's like you have to bring in some of these, values-based order that has kind of dictated things for a really long time. It doesn't seem like that's there in these talks. It seems like it's very zero-sum, very transactional. And a lot of pressure is being put on Zelensky. But people I followed for a really long time and read a lot are saying that, Zelensky should have just, been somewhat, I don't want to say obsequious, but he should have just smiled and nodded rather than engage. And they should have taken that behind the scenes. And so maybe Zelensky did take the bait. Some are saying that, it was premeditated or pre-set up, that Vance and Trump wanted to goad him. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but it kind of made me pause with Zelensky that maybe he's losing his political savviness a little bit, or his touch. But he's a president of a nation at war, and I think the perspective is a little bit in balance. You can tell, like, that's his only animating focus, is like his people, saving his territory, saving his country. And, some of the other people in the room there, they don't have that perspective. Their perspective is How does this affect us? How does this affect the United States? The American taxpayer, what do they get out of it? What's in it for them? And I think there's a huge disconnect now with those two ideas.
That's interesting you say that, because there is kind of a consensus. There's the thought that certainly when Vance jumped in, that he may have overstepped. And I got to tell you, a little Marine Corps perspective is when he started doing this, a lot of Marines go, "Oh yeah, okay, we all remember that." That's a very Marine Corps mannerism. All right, that's a boot camp thing that you get. All right, when the drill instructor's usually talking to you and they're not thrilled with your performance. Okay, so. Anyway, that was a little body language thing. But yeah, it looks like a big challenge going forward, putting it together. But we're going to see how this rolls out, because he's over in Europe getting the full treatment. Apparently going to talk to the king, a lot of other things. So we'll see how that rolls out. Just real quickly, though, what do you think about the Middle East? What do you think about Gaza in particular? The Gaza Riviera plan? That amazing AI video where you see President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu sitting side by side in the pool in swim trunks with a refreshing beverage and the whole thing. And of course, the ceasefire, basically ending. What do you think? What are your thoughts going forward there? Where do you think that's going to go?
I think there's been such tremendous progress with the release of hostages in phase 1. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's going to be extended, or at least for now, it's not going to be, which is really sad because there's more hostages to be released. But I got to say, frankly, I didn't think we would get there. I mean, the Biden administration had 5 days left. The Israelis, maybe via pressure by Trump and Steve Witkoff and others, got Netanyahu to say, okay, we'll do it. And it's just been incredible watching these scenes of these hostages who've been in captivity for hundreds of days finally reunite with their families. And I really didn't think it was going to happen that soon. It kind of just happened so quickly that it was, frankly, unbelievable to me, because we had talked about so many of the iterations of the plans and the negotiations. And then at the very last minute, they just fell apart. And that happened, 12 to 15 times over the last year. And so it was like Lucy in the football almost. And so once it finally happened, I couldn't believe it. I was like, is this real? Unfortunately, phase 2 doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. And we'll see what happens. As far as the idea, another shocking moment when President Trump had floated that idea of the United States taking some ownership in Gaza, because it's so contradictory to how they're approaching Ukraine and Zelensky, right? I mean, too much American support. You need to pay us back, Ukraine. We need to recoup what we gave you. I mean, that's the line for Zelensky and Ukraine. And then, for President Trump standing alongside Netanyahu to say, yeah, the United States, we're gonna own it. We're gonna develop the Gaza Strip, which could take decades. Those two things are just completely divergent. And so there's a lot of cognitive dissonance there. And so I was really struck by that, because a lot of voters, who voted for Donald Trump, who loved Donald Trump, and Donald Trump said this himself on the campaign trail, we're not going to start any new wars. We're not going to expand the American footprint, although we might, acquire Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal. So it's just like, does President Trump even realize that the ironies in what he's saying there? Maybe not. Maybe he does. I don't know.
It does seem strange when I saw that. It's like, take ownership. I remember in the press conference, and I don't remember, we may have been on the air watching that. I'm trying to remember if I was watching that or if we were on the air, because we talked about that day. But I remember watching it, and when he said that, I didn't hear that correctly. He has a way of kind of throwing these things out there, and you go, okay, I misheard that. He says, we're going to take control, and it's like, when he said we, is he talking about working with Israel? What was it? No, it came back. He clarified it. It's like, no, we, the United States of America, is going to take control, as in control of sovereign control of that territory. I got to tell you, and I had the same reaction you did, which is, okay, how are we avoiding getting involved in foreign, overseas stuff, and we're pulling back from engagement with the Ukraine, and we're trying not to do all these other things. At the same time, we're doing something which is one of the biggest extensions of U.S.
Oh, yeah.
footprint, if you will, overseas that I've frankly ever seen. I can't think of anything. I really can't think of anything quite like that. We've never done anything, not in that part of the world, that's for sure. We've never done anything like that. I have to go back to maybe Teddy Roosevelt's era, before, when we're doing stuff, Spanish-American War.
Right.
Amazing stuff.
Well, yeah, there was this kind of idiom in the first Trump term where a lot of reporters and people who followed the first Trump administration were like, and some of Trump's supporters even, well, you can't take Trump seriously, you have to take him literally. Or you can't take him literally, but you should take him seriously. And this is one of those things where, is Trump just injecting really, really new ideas into these kind of like staid old ideas about foreign policy to kind of just jumpstart something? Is it kind of de-chess? There's that. Or is he just kind of freewheeling stream of consciousness, making stuff up as he goes? I don't know. I don't know what it is. But it seems like it has worked. The idea is out there, the Gaza idea. And maybe if the idea is so outlandish, and if you start in left field, you can bring it back to home base easier. I don't know.
It's interesting you say that. I had a discussion recently is that if you go back to the original intent, if you will, the old saying is when you're up to your armpits in alligators, it's tough to remember your original plan was to drain the swamp. All right. The original intent was with Ukraine was to get the Europe and certainly with NATO was to get the Europeans to step up and become the primary support for Ukraine and to put money into their own defense needs so they were less reliant on the U.S. backstopping everything. All right. Yeah. And I keep that in mind. And the same thing, if you look at Gaza, the original intent was to get the Arab countries to step up and to deal with, getting Hamas out of Gaza and to rebuilding Gaza and creating a stable situation that's not a threat to Israel. That was the original intent. Now, it's like making sausage. Nobody likes to see how it's made.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of looking at this and I'm wondering, if it's a really different way, kind of like your 8D chess analogy. It's a really different way to get them to get there. It's certainly not the most symmetric way. It's very asymmetric. But if you look at that, you go, well, the Arab states are meeting and they feel the pressure. That's definitely true.
Well, and that was the thing, that was the thing with the frustration with the Biden administration with regard to Israel and Ukraine was it just seemed like they were trying the same thing over and over and over again. It was like nothing was happening in these wars. And, watching it so intently as we do, it was kind of frustrating because you think there would be someone in the Biden White House who was like, well, maybe we should change it up or try something new or expedite something. And we never really got that.
No. It's a very different approach. Hey, I hate to say this, but we're running out of time.
Okay.
Hey, thanks. Thank you for being on. Thanks for taking the time to be part of the STRAT universe, if you will. All right. And by the way, we're gonna do this again if you're game.
I am game. And Hal, I just want to say thank you. I mean, you've been just instrumental to Live Now, and you always take our phone calls, and you're happy to come on. And I can't thank you enough. I wish I could do more to thank you, but I've been so appreciative. I've learned so much from you too. And for some of your viewers might be surprised, we've never actually met in person. So.
No, it's very strange. I've met every other anchor there except you.
Yeah.
No, but I actually,
Austin
and I we had dinner a couple weeks ago, but yeah, it is very strange. And I have offered to go to visit the set in Phoenix, and you quickly come back and say, no, that's not necessary. No, you don't have to do that. And it's amazing how fast that really comes forth whenever I bring that idea. No, thanks. And I really enjoy it. I got to tell you, when we're doing this stuff, when I'm overseas on the other side of the world, that's where it gets to be really interesting. When it's
coordination.
6 o'clock hit, our time, and I'm at midnight somewhere else on the other part of the world. So that's definitely a challenge. All right. But with that, I want to I want to thank you for taking this time, and hopefully we can do another one. Obviously, there's a few more things that we could talk about, a couple more
for sure.
And so appreciate you being on STRAT, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention Live Now from Fox. Okay,
yes.
Although I just call it Fox Live Now. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. If I say Live Now, they go, huh? Yeah, so I put the Fox up there up front. So that's me. That's my rhetorical.
It's fine.
Thing. But it is available streaming service, and the numbers are pretty impressive.
Impressive.
I've been doing stuff for what, 3.5 years?
Yeah.
Something like that. And it is fascinating to watch the numbers really pick up. And I think the idea of having some place where you can go and just get news.
Yeah.
And a more objective view. It's not to say you're not going to have people on that have an opinion one way or the other. There is no probably true objectivity, but that seems to really resonate. And I'm surprised when I look at some of the numbers that Live Now is actually doing better at certain times than the big networks. So the bigger
doing something right. So
bigger networks, I say. Okay, not to say Live Now is the big network, but I'm just saying.
No, I mean, we do have, it is much smaller. We do a lot with a little. We're kind of a mighty team, but with very little and few resources. So we make it happen, and we are seeing success. So we're going to keep doing it.
Yep. All right. Well, hey, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. And by the way, for anybody listening, if you go to Hal Kempfer TV on YouTube, you can see our appearances and stuff, and you'll see where Andrew asks me lots of questions, and then I try to put something together. So anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to STRAT. We had a little strategic risk assessment discussion. Shall I say talk? Because that's what the acronym stands for. Thank you.
Thanks, Hal.